A lot happening in NBA free agency. Who won big? Who lost? We talk about it. Also, Simone Biles won a bronze medal, but she also revealed she had been experiencing or dealing with tragedy. We discuss all that and more coming up right here on Fourth and Just Us. Welcome to Fourth and Just Us, everyone. We are so glad that you are able to join us yet again for another great show. Lots of topics to discuss and talk about here. But again, we are excited that you decided to join us. Make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube. Make sure you like our page on Facebook. And don't forget that you can comment throughout the entire show. And if you have any questions, drop them in there too. I'm excited to be here with you, Lericia Harris, alongside Dr. Leonard Moore, as well as Kevin A.D. Anderson. We have a lot to talk about, but also want to remind you guys that the views that we discuss on this show, they are simply our own. They do not represent anyone else. They represent us, the way we feel, our opinions, our thoughts. So we just want to put that disclaimer out there for you all as we begin the topics for today's
The
show. And
views of Kevin B. Anderson do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Defense, the Department of the Air Force, or the United States government.
Thank you for that disclaimer yet again. I love it when we hear that. But let's just get right into it, guys. NBA free agency officially began on Monday, and teams and players wasted no time in coming to terms or creating these lucrative deals throughout the entire league. Some of the big names that we saw get some deals happening. Chris Paul, returning to the Phoenix Suns, agreed to a 4-year deal worth up to $120 million. Another person, Kyle Lowry, became a member of the Miami Heat in a sign and trade with the Toronto Raptors, 3 years, $90 million. Lonzo Ball will be joining Zach LaVine with the Bulls, 4 years, $85 million, and the Los Angeles Lakers. We'll talk a lot about them as well, but want to mention a few highlights from that team. Russell Westbrook, Trevor Ariza, Carmelo Anthony, Wayne Ellington, and they're bringing back Dwight Howard. Before we dive deeper into the specific teams, right, what were your overall reactions at just seeing these different trades and these different agreements taking place? Doc?
I don't know, Rich. I see a lot of ring chasing. I mean, it's not even fun to me anymore, and I know I'm gonna sound old school and all that, but I really hate the fact that LeBron and Wade them started this stuff years ago with the Heat. You know what I mean? I mean, it's just not fun anymore. I didn't know Dwight Howard went back there, and I told my son, it's like, man, the Lakers got like 8 or 9 new players. You know what I mean? And I think when you got so much moving, I think in many ways it detracts from fan interest. I mean, I'm dealing with a situation in my whole Lericia. I'm a diehard Cleveland fan. That's all I cheer for is all Cleveland teams. And my kids are now Lakers fans. I'm like, no, I'm gonna put y'all Negroes out of the house. But Daddy, we LeBron fans. No, you a Cleveland fan. And so to me, it's just hard to keep track of who's where. And Ariza's back with the Lakers. And I don't know, it just seems real haphazard, and it just seems really I like player control and all that, but from a fan perspective, I think it detracts from the overall competitive nature of the game.
AD, your overall reaction to just what's been happening so far in NBA free agency? I think we lost
It's
AD.
I can't hear him.
With the sound
The
really
views
quickly.
of Kevin B. Anderson have been muted by Kevin B. Anderson.
But I understand what you were saying, Doug, from a fan's perspective. It is a lot to keep up with,
Yeah.
If you start really liking a team and you start, thinking this chemistry is going to build up with this team, and then all of a sudden they switch. But
Yeah.
you're right. We didn't really see this big three sort of come into play until the Miami Heat sort of did something like this. And so now it seems as if that's what we are looking at and seeing constantly throughout all the teams. And so that brings me to the next question as it pertains to the Lakers. Like, is this a
Mhm.
super team? And did the Lakers add the right pieces, for their big three to claim a potential title this upcoming season?
Um, Rich, I don't know. I think the Lakers need shooters. And from what I see, the people they signed yesterday, maybe Ellington. But it's one thing, Lericia, to make those shots if you're playing for a team that's not too competitive. It's another thing to make those shots when you're trying to make deep playoff runs and you're getting wide open threes. And the question is, can you knock them down? I don't know. I think Westbrook and LeBron are kind of the same sort of player. But I just think they need shooters. I think they need a shooter like Milwaukee had in Connaughton. They just need a deep 3-point shooter. And I don't know if they necessarily got that yesterday.
I think Westbrook brings a different type of energy though to the Lakers. Like, of course we know LeBron and his essence and his leadership, but it's just this fieriness about Russell
Yeah,
Westbrook that I think he's going to add to them that could, potentially make them a better team. But I'm also curious to see how well they'll mesh, because just
yeah,
because you bring people together doesn't always mean that you're going to mesh well and that camaraderie, that teamwork is going to be there. So
right.
I am
And
anxious to
Larisha,
see that.
d- don't sleep on Golden State. Clay's going to be healthy. They got Draymond. They got Steph. A couple other people. Don't sleep on Golden State coming out of the West next year.
And speaking of Golden State, we can mention that Steph Curry just also got a deal, and that deal is about $215 million for 4 years with the Golden State Warriors.
Wow,
Isn't that crazy?
wow.
Isn't that crazy? I believe that
Yeah,
now makes him the highest
he is
paid, or has he the highest salary in the NBA now.
yeah, he's getting that bag, but
Hey,
he's earned every bit of it. Earned every bit of
Yeah.
it.
Doc, going back to what you were saying, that we grew up and we played on the playground, and if you wanted to stay on the court, you picked the best players.
Hmm.
And so, you had to mesh in a matter of minutes. And so I don't regret these guys for doing this. And that, particularly you look at Carmelo Anthony, he wants a ring. So he's made all his money. And, quite frankly, that's what we all compete for and that's what we want to be. So now the table has turned and now they have been collectively getting together and pursuing this. So, I mean, more power to them. It's just the way it is now.
My thing is, but they're gonna get the bag regardless. So this is not about taking money out of their pocket. They're gonna get the money regardless.
Yeah.
And so I just don't. But so so Carmelo's supposed to go to the Lakers,
But
and if
he's
they
going to
win a
go for
ring,
the veteran minimum.
he's supposed to get excited about that. He won't be a major contributor on that team. He didn't do a lot
But
with Portland this year.
but the reason why he's going to the Lakers is he wants a ring. And
Right.
whatever he contributes for that, he could retire and have a ring. That's what Charles Barkley, I mean, if you ask Charles, one of the things that he regrets is that he never won a championship. So, I mean,
Gotcha.
that means a lot to these guys. Once you get paid and then you realize what's more valuable and how you could live the rest of your life knowing that you were a champion.
Gotcha.
So are you a fan, AD, of the players having more of a voice and more of a determining factor in where they go and how they move throughout the league as it pertains to situations like this?
Well, trust me, the league the league provided them to do this.
Hmm.
So this isn't something that they just came up with and said we're going to do. If they didn't realize and use everything that they could do to form these teams and get together with one another, I mean, so the league allowed them to do it, and so more power to them.
For sure, for sure. Also want to mention DeMar DeRozan is headed to the Bulls as well. 3-year deal, $85 million, and Andre Drummond will be joining the 76ers. So a lot happening in NBA free
Mhm.
agency. We just saw this morning that John Collins will be staying with the Atlanta Hawks for a deal that's, I believe, worth about $125 million. So a lot more still coming as NBA free agency rolls on. Moving on now to the Olympics. Simone Biles won big, taking a bronze medal after competing on the balance beam on Tuesday. But during this time, she also revealed that she had been experiencing and dealing with tragedy. Before we just talk about her overall essence and what she meant to the Olympics this year, the perspective that she brought to the athletes during the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. When you found out that she was also dealing with this tragedy, which is still around the same time that she was going to be competing on the balance beam, were you pleased at how well she was able to handle it and still manage to push forward, especially after not being able to compete in previous finals and previous competitions?
She did a wonderful job of supporting her teammates, being there for them, and dealing with this crisis. I mean, we just got through with the NBA and we saw some people that weren't even on the bench with their teammates, and they weren't dealing with anything like this. I mean, Simone had nothing to prove. She's already a GOAT. And so for her to participate in this Olympics and then come there and be able to pull out the way she did because of her anguish and everything else, I mean, it's more commendable than ever.
I mean, I think what she's doing, Lericia, this whole idea about, we tell athletes you got to be mentally tough. You know what I'm saying? Don't bring your issues in the locker room. When you step between the lines, you can't think about nothing else. And I think for so long, we've treated, athletes as if they were in many ways zombies and gladiators. And I think when you add the pressure that high profile Black athletes have, in many ways, they were just taught to power through anything. And what I really like what Simone Biles said, and I think this is something that non-athletes can take away. She said that she said, I realized I am more than my victories. You know what I mean? And I think that is so powerful because too often, Lericia, you see, athletes have all these highs on the athletic field or the court, but when they're no longer playing and that identity foreclosure kicks in, they are somewhat lost because again, their whole identity was built around competing and performing. So I'm glad Simone realized that she is more than just a gymnast.
And I do want to reveal that she, again, once she competed and won the bronze in the balance beam, she said during the press conference, as she went forth with the media, she revealed that she unexpectedly lost her aunt during this time. But what you just said, Doc, made me think about just the way she changed the way athletes are viewed, especially under pressure, because she specifically mentioned carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, right? And we also saw some of this from Naomi Osaka, who previously stepped away from tennis for a little while, as it pertained to her mental health. What is your view or your take on the way that she changed the way athletes are viewed and the way that athletes are now approaching the conversation and being open and honest about it?
I think it's very. Oh, sorry, Kevin. I'm sorry, my bad.
Go back to Doc's hometown, the Cleveland Cavaliers, when and I forget his first name, Love came out and talked about his pressures and everything else. The reaction was, that okay, he's good and we're good with that and everything else. But when a lot of African American athletes come, I mean, the fans dehumanize them. It's like they have no feelings, they have no thoughts, and they should be competing. I mean, I was just with somebody the other day who is very successful in the sporting world, and he questioned Simone. And I mean, I'm looking at this guy and I'm saying, how could you do that? And so, I mean, it's just unbelievable. Plus, what she has already been able to accomplish, and I know I'm repeating myself, but I mean, there's no question who she is and what she's all about. So for anybody to say anything negative about her, I mean, it's just senseless.
You were referring to Kevin Love.
Kevin Love, yes.
Yep, Kevin
How
Love.
could I forget that first name?
Lericia, historically, Lericia, there's been this rampant rumor in the medical profession that Black women have a high tolerance for pain. That's why for so long, African American women, dying during childbirth, those numbers for Black women have always been much higher for white women. And so that stuff carries over this idea that Black women have a high tolerance for pain. They don't need an epidural when they have a kid. I mean, some of this stuff is still running rampant. And now you see that stuff carry over into the athletic realm where there's nothing wrong with you. You can fight through it. We just need you to perform. And here's the amazing part to me. Simone Biles is 24, Naomi Osaka is 20. These black women got up in front of the whole world and basically said, "You're not going to treat us like this anymore." And it's amazing. I want to see brothers start to step up and have those same conversations with the media.
But is there a different stigma as it pertains to African American males and their expression of being able to openly talk about or have the conversation as it pertains to their mental health?
Yes, I think we would frame it differently, but you are right. I think a part of the black masculinity piece, right? It's like, no, man, you got to tough it up. This is what black men do. And I think a lot of that stuff has in many ways sent a lot of us to an early grave. You're not seeing therapists, not talking to people, not even talking to our boys about what we're dealing with. And so hopefully we can begin to have a discussion that, hey, man, if you feeling depressed, if you feeling like you ain't all there, man, you got to talk to somebody, because we got to get out of this vice grip in many ways that has sort of been imposed on us.
For sure. And just to mention, Simone Biles did put out a post on Instagram saying that her heart was full as she is preparing to leave the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. And regardless, she is now coming home with 7 Olympic medals. Who else can say that they have that? I know I can't. So congratulations to her. Kudos to Simone Biles and all that she was able to accomplish and get done this year. As it pertains to the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. Moving on now to the NFL and COVID-19. We wrapped up the show last week talking about COVID and also talking about the different changes that have been happening within the NFL. Specifically want to focus in on one team today, the Washington football team, right? They were initially at the bottom of the NFL vaccination rate for a few weeks now. That was a national headline. It was well known. But however, it's been reported that 84% of Washington's current 90-man roster has received at least one vaccine shot. The NFL, we know now, has made it a little bit more uncomfortable to remain unvaccinated, as there are different protocols that are in place for vaccinated players. That's for now, though. But we also know that the league released, just some updated set of guidelines that spell out certain fines and possible loss of game checks that could result from disregarding protocols. Do you think that particular piece that I just mentioned, the loss of game checks, has something to do with this spike that we see, not only with the Washington football team, but a few other teams as well? AD?
Well, first of all, this is a team thing. So anybody who's not vaccinated is exposing their teammates. And so if they get the virus, then, that's a whole different thing. But particularly with Washington, they have a coach that just got through going through treatment for his cancer. And so he's highly vulnerable. I mean, as we see the statistics coming in with this, I still don't understand why people are hating and not getting vaccinated. I mean, it's ridiculous. So, the league is doing what they need to do to encourage these young men to get vaccinated.
Well, I mean, Lericia, the NFL is a private organization. They can just basically say, as a condition of your employment, you will get vaccinated. Plain and simple. Now, I mean, people say, well, I have the right not to get vaccinated. Absolutely. You have the right not to get vaccinated, but you don't actually have the right to work at a certain employer. And we're seeing employers all over the country saying, if you're going to work here, you're going to get vaccinated. To me, it's not a hard issue. And what amazes me, we talk about, black folk. I was in Dallas. My wife was in a play in Dallas over the weekend. And I'm talking about educated black folk talking about they ain't getting the vaccine. And I'm like, why? And here are the answers. Well, I'm careful about where I go. I always wear a mask. And then somebody talking about, I'm taking this elderberry juice or something like that. But what's scary is that these are normal, educated folks. But they have gotten caught up in this. I don't know what websites they go to. And so like we said last week, we just can't blame all Trump supporters. These are black people saying they'll get the vaccine.
Hey, Doc, where do I get some of that juice?
I don't know, man. And I don't know. I mean, and this is, man, when you see this stuff, this is like our producer Wayne was saying the other day, man, this is a tough way to die, But no, we got to make sure people get vaccinated, man.
Well, Doc, you're absolutely right, because you see these people that have had the virus now, and now they say, well, I wish I would have got the shot. Well, Some people say going through it, it's worse than death. So I mean, how many people do we have to have say and tell us and give us their stories before we realize, let's go do it?
Right. And then they talking about, oh, the vaccine is a tool of the white man. Well, while I went and got my shot, it was a whole bunch of white folk in line ahead of me. And so I understand some of the historic stuff, but folks, it's 2021. We got to go get that vaccine.
Absolutely.
So again, we are talking about the COVID situation as it pertains to the NFL. The Washington football team no longer at the bottom. They now have 84% of their current 90-man roster who have received at least one vaccine shot. The Vikings now have the lowest COVID-19 vaccination rate in the NFL. And they just have 64.5% of the players fully vaccinated, which again is well below the league's 90% rate. Do you believe that we could see all of the NFL teams and their vaccination rates improve prior to the start of the season? AD?
So, Richard, the highest paid player on the Minnesota Vikings has not been vaccinated. Coaches come out
Wow.
and talk about how disappointed he is with not only the players, but the coaches who've not been vaccinated. So, I mean, when it comes from the top and it comes from the leadership, I mean, there's a message there that, I mean, you should take seriously. The only way I think many, not many, some of these players is that they're going to sit out and they're not going to be paid. And
Right.
then we'll see
Right.
if they're not standing in line getting a shot.
And to me, it's disrespectful. I mean, the head coach's job could be, because if these guys aren't, get COVID during the season or whatever, or if they're close contact, you are impacting the team's performance. So their selfishness is really could potentially, Lericia, impact everybody's bag for the season.
Hey, Doc, you just said a key word, them being close to one another. On the football field, you are close to one another. And then inside, when you're in having meetings, you're sitting right on top of one another. So now, if you haven't been vaccinated and you're not wearing a mask, you're making everybody vulnerable.
Right.
There's no question about it. So, I mean, it doesn't take a rocket science to figure this stuff out.
That's right. That's right.
And as we continue on with the show, we will, of course, continue to mention and talk about the COVID situation, how it's affecting our world, how it's affecting our nation, and of course the sports world, because here we do intersect the conversation of race, politics, and sports. That's what Fourth and Just Us is all about. Moving on now to another hot topic, and I'm sure this is going to bring out a lot amongst the fellas here, talking about the name, image, and likeness protocol as it pertains to high school athletes. We know that the college world has been flipped upside down in the past month as it pertains to this long-held rule that was changed by the NCAA, which now allows college athletes to monetize their fame, in essence. They now can make money, endorsement deals from autographs, and profit off their social media accounts without the fear of losing their scholarships. But how does this affect the high school level? Well, this trickled down to the high school level as it pertains to California, because they are the only state that permits high school athletes to profit off of their name, image, and likeness. That means that students in the rest of the country aren't able to tap into this growing market at all. And so a lot of the student athletes are allowed to profit again, with the stipulation, though, that they cannot use their school's name, logo, or team uniform in an advertisement. So this rule, in essence, and this came from a state rep, said this rule has been necessary since many of the student athletes are also involved in the film and television industries in some sort of way. So when you hear about California being the only state that actually allows high school students, how does this affect other high school athletes across the nation? And how does this affect high school athletes in general as it pertains to this NIL rule and the recent changes that we've seen as it pertains to the collegiate level, and now them being allowed to actually profit off of this? AD?
So, Doc, this is how you do it. Hook 'em horns. So the top recruit that's going to Ohio State from Texas left school early so he could become part of the NIL because of the state of Texas not doing this. And if I'm not wrong, Texas and probably Florida are one of the biggest high school football enthusiasts in the country. I don't think that they're going to allow or they're going to have this restriction on NIL much longer, because it's definitely going to affect them and the recruiting. And particularly when you see that Texas is going to the SEC now. And I believe everybody's going to follow Ohio State. And what they did now is that they have a licensing agreement with any of their student athletes doing the NIL, that they will be able to use the trademarks of the university. I mean, I got to give it to Gene Smith. I mean, this is phenomenal. And for his forward way of thinking, is going to set a trend across intercollegiate athletics that, again, we thought that just Oklahoma and Texas going to the SEC, this is much bigger than this. So what Ohio State is doing now is, tremendous. And Gene Smith, kudos to you, because you were ahead of the curve.
And AD, I'm just curious though, AD, of what you think it's going to, or how you think it's going to have an effect on high schoolers who aren't in California and do not have this opportunity to tap into this growing market.
Well, one, they might move to California so they can do this, or state legislators are going to change those laws because they're going to get pressure from all these supporters of these athletic programs in the different states, and they're going to change that because they want to keep, and everybody wants to keep these kids in their own schools, to their own universities. So I believe you'll see a rapid change.
Doc?
I don't know. So the athlete Kevin is talking about is a kid from Dallas named Quinn Ewers. He's a top-rated quarterback in the 2022 class. I guess he's taken a lot of credits, and so apparently his dad revealed that he had a lot of pending NIL deals. But the state of Texas doesn't allow high school students to do NIL deals. So basically, the kid is finishing high school, I think, in August, and he's going to go enroll at Ohio State, and he'll be able to sign those NIL deals. And the dad said he had deals for like a total of like $1 million. And so it's very interesting. But what I love about this, Kevin, Lericia, I love the fact that sometimes when a white kid does it first, it makes it easier for the brothers and sisters coming behind them. I mean, this is a big deal. This kid giving up his senior year, the top quarterback in the country. They went to the state finals last year, would probably win it this year. And so here's my point. When a white kid like that does it first and is not ridiculed, it makes it easier for the brothers and sisters coming behind him to do it and not get ridiculed as well. And let me say this, Kevin, we got to be careful not to give these athletic directors too much credit. Because some of these same athletic directors now who are being innovative about NIL deals and stuff like that were the same ones 2 years ago who were knocking NIL, they were knocking pay for play, and they were some of the same ones that said, no, the scholarship is all that we should give these kids. And so now that they are doing these initiatives, it's not because they care about the kid. It's not because they want the kid to get some money. It's all about recruiting. It is all about, we are doing this because this is in the university's best interest. But we got to remember, some of these same athletic directors who we want to praise now for being innovative were the same ones saying behind the scenes, no, we don't need to pay these kids.
Well, as I said last week, Doc, Gordon Gekko said this, and the philosophy is greed is good. Because if it wasn't about that, we wouldn't be seeing the different universities going to different conferences. I mean, Texas and Oklahoma was definitely for the money. No question about it. But, here's the thing. Someone said this on the radio. I was listening to talk radio show coming into work today. He said that, some of these kids have to capitalize now and get the money because they might not go and play professionally. So now is their open window to do this. And so, more power to them.
Well, let me ask you a question, Kevin, and Lericia, let me ask you a question. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
If we look back at this, so at one time, our Olympic team were nothing but amateurs, couldn't earn any money. So then we saw, well, that isn't working because we saw what the other countries are doing. So then they were able to get sponsorships. This is no different than what we did with the Olympic participants. So now, but the only thing I'll bring up, Doc, and I was in a room full of my colleagues a while ago. And I was talking to them because the base baseball, the tennis, the hockey, the golf kids could all have agents. The only
Mm,
kids who couldn't have agents
wow.
were the football and basketball kids. So I asked the both of you, what's the difference and why is that?
No, I mean, it's crazy, and I know Larish is a big, Florida State fan. Florida State, Larish. I'm sorry, Florida fan. My bad. And so when I hear these athletic departments talking about making moves for money, here's my biggest question: What are they doing with the money? The money never gets reinvested back into the student athlete. So it's like they want all this money, and it's just to compete, to continue to build these shiny objects, locker rooms, scoreboard, stadiums, luxury boxes, training facilities. It's like at some point, can't because here's the thing: the academic experience for a lot of black kids at these big schools has not changed in 40 years. So they got all this money, but there is nothing new academically these schools are doing for these kids. And I know I'm on my soapbox, but I'm just deeply passionate about that stuff.
Well, hey, Doc, I got to defend some of us because some
Okay.
of us know what we needed to do. So,
Hmm.
for a prime example, when I was at Maryland, we brought back, and so any athlete that wanted to come back that was in good standing after they left, they would get their scholarship back and we would make sure
Hmm.
they graduated. One
Okay.
person in particular was Juan Dixon. After he got through playing in the NBA, Juan came back, got his degree, and now he's a head coach in college. So there are some people that are doing this, but
Got you.
I'm with you. There's not a lot. And
Yeah.
so that needs to change, or, it's going to become Sunday on Saturday. That's what we're
Absolutely.
looking.
Mhm.
Well, if things keep going in this direction as it pertains to high schoolers, you might see Sunday on Friday too if others start to adapt this rule that
Right.
California has.
Right.
Because think about it, the reasoning that I saw behind this rule being in California was that a lot of student athletes are involved in the film and television industry. But think about the state of Georgia, where I am in
Mm.
now, and Atlanta. This is also another
Yeah.
booming film and television area. So, do you think it's likely that if this is specifically the only reasoning why high schoolers are allowed to profit off of their name, image, and likeness, do you see that trend trickling over to Georgia as it pertains to high schoolers and them being allowed to do so? Because there are still a lot of student athletes who are high schoolers who are also in this specific industry in this state. Could it potentially happen here?
So,
I don't
Larissa,
think.
what you're going to see is you're going to see by the end of the month that there's going to be more than a dozen states, if not more, that are going to change these rules and these laws within the end of the month. Trust me on that.
Yeah, Larisha, I think it's going to change not because of Georgia's burgeoning film industry, but just because they want to remain competitive. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny, these politicians, these Republican politicians, can do a lot of crazy stuff, but when it comes down to legislation that can help them get some more brothers on that football field, they will pass that legislation in 10 minutes.
Mm. Interesting. We shall see what happens as we continue to figure out the kinks and all of this. We know that the name, image, and likeness and that recent change is still fairly new, and they're still working out so much as it pertains to this specific rule. And I'm sure we'll see more changes and things play out as well on the high school
Mhm.
level. But moving on now to another important topic, the NCAA has called for a constitutional convention amid turmoil. The National Collegiate Athletic Association, they announced on Friday that it would hold a specially called constitutional convention in November to consider potentially sweeping changes to how the national body governs sports programs at about 1,100 colleges and
Mhm.
universities. The association plans to appoint a 22-person committee to propose what is called dramatic changes to be considered at the NCAA's annual meeting in January. AD, you being a person who heavily involved in a lot of the direction or the business aspect of collegiate athletics and colleges, universities, your perspective on why this is potentially happening, why this special call meeting is taking place.
So, first, I must go back to disclaimer because these are my views. So, 15, 20 years ago, I sat in a room and there were 20 to 30 of my colleagues. And I looked at them and I said, we need to make changes now because this is broke. And I paralleled it to the United States government and what was happening in Congress. And what was happening in Congress then is not anywhere where it is now, but it was broke then. So the godfather of athletic directors got up, he looked at me and said, everything is okay. We don't need to make any changes. And now look what's happening.
Yeah.
Now we have the federal government involved. And because I'll just be honest with you, we have lacked leadership with vision. And these things did just not pop up. And we let them catch up with us and pass us, and then we're reacting to them. Here's my problem with this constitutional convention and meeting and looking at the people they're going to put on. The people that have been dictating and overlooking this are going to be in that room. So, what makes us think that there's going to be any changes? Now, if I was king for the day, I would look at bringing in some of the presidents, but I would be looking at industry leaders. I would try to bring in all the commissioners from the professional leagues. I would definitely bring in some student athletes and look at this in totality. Will they do that? I don't know. Now, you know I like to tell stories, so if I can have a minute of time and tell this story. So I was on the first diversity and inclusion committee. So in our first meeting, we were talking about this. And so I made a recommendation that we bring in Commissioner Taglaboo and the Fitz-Pollard organization, and also the owner of the Phoenix Cardinals, the Bidwells, because they're the ones who came up with the Rooney Rule, or they were, leading in that. I had a college president from a Power Five yell at me and tell me that he would, and we will not let any billionaires come in here and tell us how to run our business. Well, some of the universities that I've worked at, they're billion-dollar institutions. And this thing is broken. And so I know that we can't do everything that the NFL does, but there are certain things and tenets that they had put in place that would be ideal for college athletics, and looking at that. So this is a mentality you're dealing with. And to be honest with you, a lot of this stuff is way over the president's heads. And if we look at the leadership in college athletics, we've just proved that it's over our heads, because we're in a situation now that is very problematic. And we've invited the federal government to come in and fix this. What kind of leadership, what kind of vision, how can you move forward as an entity with that kind of mentality?
I don't know. I'll say this. I mean, I think the NCAA does need a new model, but I want to caution people. Let's not. I don't want to see this new model just in many ways favor the biggest schools with the most money. And here's what I tell people all the time. Yeah, there's a lot of attention focused on Texas and Ohio State and places like that. But you got a lot of black kids playing at the Division II and the Division III level, and lower level Division I, particularly, women's basketball, stuff like that. And so my point is, as the model's currently constructed, the Final Four TV contract, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, the Final Four TV contract really helps subsidize a lot of those smaller athletic departments at the Division II and Division III level. Now, Division III doesn't give scholarships. Division II gives partial scholarships. So we need to understand that a change in the model, it could have a trickle-down effect, you know what I mean, where a lot of our kids are. And I just want to see that those kids in the non-revenue generating sports still have opportunities to compete in college.
Hey, Doc, you're absolutely right. But there is going to be a trickle-down effect. But one thing I'd like to clarify, too, is the NCAA has very little to do with football. Very little
Right.
to do. So that's going to be a separate entity, and they're going to move forward with that. But the biggest thing is the basketball tournament brings in the majority of the money for all the schools to prosper on. So here's the other thing. If the Power Five were to move and become its own conference entity, whatever you want to call it, well, they take the tournament with them. And one of the models they talked about is that all 65 teams would play, and that would be the tournament. So what happens to those schools that are outside? And I mean, we're looking at universities possibly folding because of
Mhm.
because of COVID and everything else. So now, I mean, if we're looking at that, what's that going to do with the athletic department? Because some of these schools that have, all these teams,
Mhm.
how can you finance that?
Yeah,
Particularly
your athletic
football,
department is going to
Jake.
turn into rec sports. Basically, you will have intramurals. So that's what we may be looking at.
Hey, but Doc, there is a way, and Larissa, there is a way to fix this. Is that we put the genie back in the bottle, we say, and give back the TV money, and we go back to the way it used to be,
Hmm.
which will never happen. But, I mean, that's what we're looking at now. Either we accept where it's going or we go back to where it was. But,
Yeah.
the in between now, we've lost that. So,
Mhm.
like you said, there has to be a new model, but it has to be fair for everybody and for everybody to benefit from. Because if not, I mean, it's just going to be a big professional
Mhm.
entity.
So why is there hesitation, you think, AD, for people to accept the fact that some sort of change has to happen?
Because, well, some people are just stuck in their own ways, and other people have seen, well, I believe that there's a lot of people that we have been involved at the very top that have very little or no understanding of what we're dealing with, just to be plain and simple. You know, um, I look at how a lot of these institutions are run, and they're billion-dollar enterprises. And yet, and still, you bring people in that have no understanding on how to run a business. Now, Doc, help me with this. But when you bring academic people in, at most schools, you have a provost, and
Mhm.
they're the ones who are in charge of the academic mission.
Right.
And so if you have somebody doing that, why we wouldn't see that we would bring somebody in with some business
Mhm.
acumen, knowing how to look at this. I mean, research dollars, you're talking
Right.
about endowments, you're talking about building multi-million dollar buildings and everything else. I, I hope I'm not offending anybody.
No, you're good, man. You're good.
The
You're good.
philosophy who gets hired to be a president, what does he know about any of that?
Yeah.
Very little, I think.
Well, what they learn is that no matter how much they talk about the chemistry department or how much NSF money they raise, they know at the end of the day, none of that matters. The Power Five college presidents I talk to, they are often sitting on pins and needles, Lericia, every Saturday afternoon. Because they know if the football team loses, they're getting bombarded with emails for the next 48 hours. And so they begin to realize that, hey, man, I don't know much about this, but I better learn it because, to be honest with you, the alumni don't care about the academic reputation. The alumni don't care about, what the graduation rate is. The alumni just want to win football games.
Hmm. That's an interesting perspective, Doc, because you would think as an alumni of an institution, the academic portion of it would be a top priority because that's in essence what you want, or you want your
Right.
athletes to be a representation of the academic portion as well. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a great movie. Y'all remember saw Django? Y'all see that movie? It's a great movie. And I
Yeah.
think there was a scene. I forgot what was it Matt Damon? I forgot the guy's name, but they were sitting on this couch, and they basically had these two enslaved brothers just fighting each other, and the two white guys were sitting back on the couch smoking a pipe or something, just watching these guys beat each other's brains out. And to me, we can't deny that college football, that there is a plantation complex there. People don't like when I say it. They get offended when I say it, but nobody has ever called me a liar because what you're talking about is young black labor generating tens and hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions, when you combine everybody together. And so it's this plantation complex that I'm sick of. And here's what I want to understand, Lericia. Help me understand this. I come into contact with a lot of my white conservative friends, hate affirmative action. They hate it. Oh, Leonard, that's reverse discrimination. You all aren't discriminated against anymore. I say, but okay. At these elite institutions, UCLA, Michigan, Ohio State, USC, Florida, Vanderbilt, the Ivy League, if you are an athlete, you do not have to have the same, the admissions criteria is different for you. The bar is low. You don't go through the same admissions door. You are labeled a special admit, and they let you into the institution. And my good friend, Scotty Graham, who works at Arizona now, running backs coach, got his undergrad degree at Ohio State. Hey, listen to this, got his undergrad degree at Ohio State, then got a master's in Black Studies at Ohio State, wanted to get a PhD in sociology at Ohio State. He applied to the sociology program. They told him his GRE scores were too low. He said, well, hell, my GPA and my SAT scores were low when I came from New Jersey to play ball here, but you all didn't have a problem admitting me as long as I was playing ball. But now that I'm trying to get a PhD in sociology, you want to talk about my test scores.
Oh, wow. That brings in a totally different perspective and a deeper conversation that I'm
Absolutely.
sure we will continue. But we got to keep moving forward with the next topic on today's show. And one I know that is very sensitive to you, Doc. Syracuse, their women's head basketball coach, Quentin Hillsman, has decided to resign. And this resignation is actually following a report alleging a culture of fear and abuse. And this was just over a month ago. When you heard of his resignation this week, Doc, what were your thoughts?
I was happy. I'm not a big fan of what they call cancel culture, but I think the Black community needs to start holding these coaches accountable. This is the third Black coach in women's basketball this year who's gotten dismissed over allegations. You had the brother here at Syracuse, you had the brother at SMU, and you had that sister at Detroit Mercy. And when you read the stories of how these coaches are doing these mind games and manipulating 18 and 19 and 20-year-old girls for their own benefit, this is reprehensible. Some of these coaches need to go to jail. Because if I treated a student in my history class like the way some of these coaches are treating student athletes, oh my gosh, I would be under an indictment quickly. But there is this culture of cover-up culture that goes on in these athletic departments. Now, if you just Google women's basketball and coach harassment, you're going to see a whole lot of allegations. Now, here's the funny piece. Pretty much every athletic director has a senior women's administrator. Now, if these senior women's administrators aren't looking out for these young women, what the hell are they doing there? And this is deeply personal for me. My daughter plays college basketball, and everything I tell parents, go check on you got a son or daughter playing sport, go check up on your kid. Just don't call them. You need to go visit them and look at them in the face to see how they are doing. If you read the stuff from Syracuse, a lot of the girls didn't tell their parents the abuse they were dealing with. And the parents only found out later. These coaches need to be held accountable. They need to be indicted, and they need to go to prison.
AD?
I don't know if I could follow that, Doc. But here's the deal. It's much bigger than the coaches. And as you referred to, it's the leadership of the institution. And I grew up with a philosophy, you inspect what you expect. And a lot of my colleagues have no clue on what's going on with many of these teams. And so I don't know if you call it there's a blind eye effect or whatever, but until crises happen, then you have reaction. And again, I'm going to go back to the overall state of intercollegiate athletics. And as we've seen in the last couple of years, it's a crisis that comes forward and then we fix it, or we try to fix it. So, that's all I could say to this, because, if you're on top of your game and you're looking at your program, and if you're inspecting what you're expecting, you see these things and these tendencies before they get out of hand, and that's when you have to deal with them. So, early on, somebody should have caught and saw what this coach is doing. Call him in his office, call him in your office, and have that discussion. If there's not change, then you have to go. Plain and simple. But as we see, that's not happening.
And these are Black people. These are Black folk doing this stuff.
Well, hey, Doc, when we get into this, though, it's colorless, because what we're chasing now is the green. I mean, I've seen a lot of Black folk who don't want to lose their job because they're making this money. And it's not only the money, it's the power and the status. And you know how we are. You walk in the room, I'm the coach of so-and-so and everything else. And some of us like, hey, that's the problem, that, we don't want to lose the power, the status, or the money. So we start treating people differently than when we grew up and how we wanted to be treated.
but Larisha, is my self-esteem that low that I have to abuse young people to keep my money?
I think that's a personal
No, hey,
question,
Doc,
Doc.
I'm sorry, but it's not about that. It's about what they've seen. A lot of people, what they've seen on TV and what somebody else did and what somebody else got away with. See, it's a whole different world now. And if I was getting into it, and particularly coaching, I would have majored in psychology
Hmm.
because you've got to treat everybody fair, but you can't treat these kids the
I'm about to
same.
say.
Because here's in our own community, in the black community, we've got an array of where we come from. So, there's different kids coming from different communities that you have to deal with differently. I'll tell you a story. One of my Major League Baseball friends is a manager, and he had this young black man who was on his team that came from a community that was middle class, if not upper middle class. And so he asked him where he came from, and he said, "Well, I grew up on a cul-de-sac." And my boy looked at him and said, "What? You grew up where?" And so, I mean, that's the difference that we're dealing with. And, we're dealing with all kind of different kids. And see, most of these campuses don't understand that. And they try
Right,
to deal with these kids and put them in the same box. And
right.
that's destined for failure.
But is that really something though that could still be held on to? Because by now there we've seen several examples, right, of this abusive sort of culture and pushing forth this fear from other previous coaches. So is that something that can still be said or utilized now for coaches nowadays? Because you've seen people who have gotten in trouble for this type of behavior.
Mhm.
You should know as a coach coming in that you're not going to have the same person. Like you're not going to
Right.
have individuals who come from the same background, that were raised the same. You're going to have all these
Mhm.
different personalities and perspectives coming in. So, as a coach, isn't that automatic for you to know? And isn't that, or shouldn't it also be required or automatic for you to know how to properly handle and deal with these various types of personalities that are coming into your care, your responsibility?
Larisha,
Larissa, that's
it
go
has been
ahead.
my experience, Larisha, that a lot of these coaches, that their intellectual growth has been stunted. That their intellectual growth for a lot of them stops at about 22 or 23. They don't read
Oh,
books. They don't go to conferences. And basically all they do is watch film all day. And I mean, have you ever talked to some of these people? I tell people this, some of the dumb, let me not say that, but some of these people aren't the brightest folks. They're not. They don't read books. They're not aware of current affairs. And again, it's like the childhood. It's like the child prodigy, right? Who was taken out of school at ninth grade and just sit on the road to entertain. These coaches, their intellectual growth stopped at about 22.
interesting.
Well, Doc, yes. And we'll take it a step further. Many of these coaches that are coming up now have been mentored by coaches that are in their
Hmm.
position now. And
That's
so
true.
the sad part about it is the younger coaches come in and they think they should have what these successful coaches should have immediately.
Right.
They've
That's right.
got their mentality. And so I worked with a gentleman and a white gentleman, and he was good people in his heart. I knew that. But he came from a nuclear family, and so that's all he knew. So now he thought everybody else should be like that.
Mm-hmm.
And, that was to his demise. So,
Right.
I mean, it's a matter of the smarter and some of these successful coaches, they understand that they know how to treat. Again, I'm going to go back. Herm Edwards told me this: Kevin, I'm going to be fair with everybody, but I'm not going to
Mhm.
treat you the same.
Right.
And,
Mm-hmm.
I live by that too, because if we treat everybody the same, we're going to miss out and we're not going to do what we're supposed to do.
For sure.
Absolutely.
So does this lead into another aspect of coaching as and also something for the colleges as well? Should it be a requirement for coaches to go through some
Yes.
sort of class or training to
Mhm.
know how
Mhm.
to manage and deal with various personalities and various people from all different
Right.
sorts of demographics or areas?
I mean, I
So,
mean,
Larissa, I doubt if the athletic director of Alabama is going to go into Nick Saban's office and tell him that he needs to do this. That's the problem you have. I mean, you could go to most of these campuses, and football and basketball is dealt with differently than everything else.
True. True.
Man, y'all know I could go on this all day. I mean, this is
Go
one of
ahead.
my.
Go
This is
ahead.
one of my. I mean, could you imagine me? Let's just say I have you. You have a teenage daughter. Okay, she's in college and she's in my class. Could you imagine her not doing well on the test and me cussing her out, or me calling her a piece of shit, or me telling her you fat, you need to go lose some weight? One of the most disturbing allegations from Syracuse. They said there was a sister who needed an inhaler during practice. She had asthma. They said the brother told her they were about to do some running. He said, "Well, if you use your inhaler, you're not gonna play a game. You're not gonna play against Pitt the next game." So guess what? So the sister ran without the inhaler, and this is the nonsense I'm talking about. And when you read some of the comments, that article was in the Athletic, and you read some of the comments, one dude said that coach lucky he didn't talk to my daughter like that. But it is a problem. It is something I want to expose, and in my dream, I want to set up a hotline for student athletes dealing with coach abuse. They call this number, we come investigate, and we're not taking the complaints, Kevin, to compliance or the athletic director. We're taking the complaints to the district attorney. That's when you'll start to see things change.
Well, Doc, unfortunately, I don't even see that happening because 8 months after I left Maryland, that young man died on the football field.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
part of the reason why is that we put medicine to be practiced with these big programs. And so one of the recommendations was to have a doctor on the practice field for every practice. Well, it came back from the leadership of the university that they didn't want to do this because they didn't want to lose power and control. And now you have that young man because there were certain people in leadership that didn't want to give up or perceive power and control. So when we're dealing with that mentality, it's very difficult.
Absolutely.
Well, there's our sound, our buzzer, as we have to wrap up the final topic of the show. We could go on and on as it pertains to this particular discussion, and I'm sure we'll have many other discussions, similar to this one as we continue on with our topics every week. Before we get ready to sign off here today, always have to allow everyone to have their final words, their final thoughts. So we will start with you, AD, your final word.
So I like to wish happy birthday to Professor Chishaka, who was one of my professors when I went to San Francisco State University, a dynamic brother who helped shape my life. So, Doc, happy birthday.
I want to give a shout out to the sisters, about to start playing high school volleyball. A lot of them, like my daughters, maybe one or two black girls on the team. And they all, if you get all these sisters in the room, they all share similar struggles. So I just want to encourage y'all sisters as y'all start y'all volleyball season. Understand you representing for the community, and you got a lot of young black girls looking up to you. So let's have a dynamic year.
And for me, I'd like to shout out my family and also my boyfriend. I can finally reveal to you all and our Fourth and Just Us audience, I am expecting twins. And, thank you. And this past weekend, I was able to learn the genders of my babies. I am blessed to be having the best of both worlds. I'm having a little boy and a little girl. So I am extremely excited about this new journey that's taking place.
Well,
So,
hey, Lericia, thank you, because we're going to have two members to the show.
That's right.
yes, 2 new members, and they must be enjoying the show so far because they have been moving this whole show.
The views of Kevin B. Anderson do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Defense, the Department of the Air Force, or the United States government.
Well, we
Thank you,
appreciate
Wayne.
you all for joining us today on Fourth and Just Us. So we hope that you enjoyed the show, the conversation, the opinions. Remember, this is the show where we intersect race, sports, and politics. And we also want to hear from you. So don't forget to comment, throughout the show and even after. Subscribe to us on YouTube and make sure you like us over on Facebook. Join us again next week, same place, same time, right here on Fourth and Just Us. Thank you. Have a good day.
Peace.